Welcome to this conversation we're having with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bob Woodward. I am Jared Bowen of WGBH News and Television and Radio. We are here at our studio at the Boston Public Library and, of course, broadcasting live on Facebook. We will be having this conversation. We also welcome your questions, whether you're here in the library or watching wherever you are on Facebook. Welcome, Mr. Woodward. A pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
So let me back up just a little bit. Obviously, we're looking at the impeachment inquiry hearings right now, and a lot of people are looking back at history, which you are very much a part of. And that, of course, is the impeachment of Richard Nixon. If past is prologue, how do you counsel people to look at the impeachment hearings that we're watching right now?
Very carefully. Watergate was such a large series of illegal activities orchestrated by Nixon, wiretapping reporters, campaign of espionage and sabotage against the Democrats, clearly illegal, well-funded with campaign money covertly, and then an organized cover-up, again, where they paid people hundreds of thousands of dollars to not tell the truth and obstruct justice. In the impeachment inquiry, it's focused on Ukraine now, which is mind-boggling and clearly a misuse of presidential power. But the question is, when you look at it through the eyes of how the Constitution works, what is the Senate going to do when Trump is impeached or charged? And is there enough here to cause some 20 Republicans to break ranks and join the Democrats to remove Trump from office? And I do my reporting with Republican senators, and it's not reached that point. Now, it may, but it has not.
Well, I won't ask you to predict on that level, but when you see what the Intelligence Committee is doing in relative quick speed compared with what we saw in the prior two impeachment inquiries and hearings in our lifetime, how do you reconcile how quickly this is moving this time around?
Well, reconcile in what sense? In
terms of, is this moving very fast, or should they?
Well, it's moving fast, but it's very narrow. And Elizabeth Drew, one of the people who wrote about Watergate and wrote books and covered Watergate for the New Yorker, wrote in the New York Times yesterday, said, you know, this is appalling what's been discovered, but by making it so narrow, you're talking about potential removal of a president from office, a very, probably in the Constitution, in American history, other than war, the most important thing a government can do or Congress can do. So I've written about other things that Trump did, particularly in national security and jeopardized national security. And if you look at it through the lens of not just one thing, but a series of things, we have a governing crisis. We have a nervous breakdown on all fronts. And to zero in on one thing may not work. Now it may, maybe they're going to find more things. Obviously, a lot of people are appalled by it. But it's a matter of, in the case of Watergate, quantity of evidence. There was so much illegal activity on so many fronts, ordered, supervised by Nixon. Then it's about the quality of evidence, and they had the tapes where you can hear Nixon ordering the payment of blackmail money.
Well, obviously Nancy Pelosi, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, decided to move forward here. What's your estimation? Does this merit impeachment or the conversation about impeachment of the president?
Well, we have it. It's an inquiry and an investigation. We're going to see, because in the end, Trump has said publicly impeachment's good for him. Now, I don't believe that for a minute. It certainly is not good for the country. And the more time you spend As I get to do as a reporter, you realize how deeply divided this country is. And it may not be 50-50, but it may be 60-40. And so we're going to have to do what we hate to do, and that is be patient and wait. We live in an internet culture of impatience and speed.
Well, you just mentioned the reporting you did in your most recent book, Fear, in which you document issues around governments, obviously involving the president. Were you suggesting that there are more grounds for impeachment, or there are other areas for greater scrutiny there in what you've documented?
Well, impeachment is that constitutional process, and the members of the House get to decide on that, and if there's a trial in the Senate, they get to decide. As a journalist, happily, I don't have to vote. I just try to find out what happened, and whether you judge something, that should be impeachable or not, that's very subjective. The issues of national security, and I'm going to talk about this at some length tonight, where Trump did not realize exactly with particularly North Korea or Iran. He almost went to war with Iran and was within a matter of minutes or hours of launching a strike into Iran, and he learned that maybe 150 people might be killed. Well, if some foreign country came here and killed 150 people, we would be at war. And so I'm not sure he understands the consequences of war fully, and you look at what my reporting showed, that the Secretary of Defense had to tell the President, we're working with allies because that protects the country, it's the best expenditure of money, and grew so frustrated when Trump didn't get it that he said, Mr. President, we're doing these things to prevent World War III.
Well, I'll ask you a little bit more about your sources in a moment to understand exactly what has happened in the White House and accounts that we've not really seen in the public, especially in these inquiry hearings so far. But you have an understanding of the president, of his temperament. Of course, we heard your phone call with the president once this book came out. You do have some level of relationship with the man. Do you have a sense of what the climate is in the White House at this moment?
Well, I think it's very tense, and I think it's full of stress. He doesn't like the impeachment inquiry. He doesn't like them trying to get his taxes, trying to call all the people who work for him, which he is resisting. One thing you learn about Trump, he's a fighter. He, in fact, loves to fight. He seeks combat. And so we're in a fight, and it quite likely next year is just going to be a bloody year because the country is divided. Now, maybe something is going to be discovered, maybe, I was thinking about this coming on the plane this morning. There's so much instability in the world. There's instability in the White House. Now there's a story Trump is disappointed and fighting with his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He had battles with all of these people. He's battling with the Federal Reserve Chairman. The whole relationship with North Korea, which has nuclear weapons, is unstable. Where is the relationship, not just on trade, but many issues going with China? What about the Middle East? This is, you go around and you try to say how many potential crises are there just on the table, and it's a very large number.
Why does he do this, and how is he managing through anger and the temperament that you've described in the book?
Well, why does he do it? Why is he Trump? Easier to describe the creation of the universe.
You don't have insight?
Well, I have some, and I'm working on a second book, and also want to make sure that he gets a fair hearing. That it's the great British novelist Graham Greene who said, don't despise your enemies or people who are on the other side. They have a case. And I think it's the job of a journalist to look at the case on all sides at the same time, and not through a partisan lens, but through a reporting lens. This country is in a bad, unstable condition. I described in the first book a nervous breakdown of the executive branch. I think there's more of a nervous breakdown now than before.
Let's talk a little bit about your sources. You work in a process, as you always have, very famously, of course, with Deep Throat, of deep background. What's the extent of your knowledge of the White House? How deep into the White House does it go?
What's the it?
Your understanding of what's happening right now.
Well, I have some understanding, and it's never as complete as I would like. But a lot of those people are gone. The Secretary of State Tillerson gone, the Secretary of Defense Mattis gone, the Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn gone, 2 White House Chiefs of Staff gone, all kinds of people not able to do and build the relationship with Trump that is necessary when you're subordinate in this government. At the same time, you have to be able to lay it on the line, tell the truth to the president, as I describe people doing, as happens. But Trump has a lot of self-confidence. He has gone through a self-validation, more than you or I or anyone has had. He became president, no political office. People kept saying, oh, he's not going to be able to do it, and he did it. So he feels pretty good about himself. It gives him, when he sits with people who work with him, we're here because of me. He did it. And so there is not the kind of flow of honest communication that there should be.
As you're working with your sources, at what point do you decide that you are getting an accurate picture, again, of what's happening? You recount a lot of scenarios here in great detail versus how somebody might be trying to spin you.
Sure. What's nice is I keep asking for specifics, get documents, get diaries, cross-check what firsthand witnesses say. There's, the sources are not named here, but the situations are named. So-and-so met with so-and-so at this time in the Chief of Staff's office. This was the issue. Somebody swiped papers from Trump's desk, fearing that he would do things. I actually print the documents in the book, so I think there's no question of their authenticity, but this is because I have time to go back and check and recheck.
Do you find it's more challenging to maybe not do the work, but are you more cognizant of how the work is received in this moment where journalism is questioned, where facts are questioned, where truth is questioned?
Well, it's a complicated environment, but you can look through the book. Its weight is its specifics. This happened. Here's the document. These are the participants. And when the book came out, some people denied it, but they subsequently have said to me, oh yeah, well, of course that's true.
But they deny it because?
I think in some cases because Trump asks them to.
And even if they're not with the administration, they still feel beholden?
Well, I mean, these are all people in the administration.
What about the institution of journalism as a whole? Do you worry about what you're seeing now?
I think it's a tough time for journalism, and Trump has somewhat successfully questioned the very notion of a fact. My newspaper has calculated more than 13,000 things he said that are untrue or misleading. So how, a lot of people question us, and they should, but we've got a long road back to reestablish more credibility.
But you think there is a road back, that it hasn't been forever changed when you do have a whole
nothing is
sector.
ever forever changed.
That's a good point.
I mean, yes, it's hard work, but that's what we do, and we need to be conscious of the assault and criticism of the media and do a better job. I think my newspaper's done a superb job
You're
across
talking about
the
the
board.
Washington Post, of course.
Yeah.
But how much of the criticism do you think is valid?
I think there's some that is, and one misstep, one question, people, viscerally, I think, kind of think, well, why is the media nosing in this? People have had experiences with the media where they're being questioned, and they're, hey, wait a minute, where are the limits here? And we need to be very humble, if you will, self-effacing, but determined, aggressive, but patient about this process. So I'm optimistic. I think we can do this, but we can't pretend it hasn't changed.
Returning to anonymous sources for a moment, tomorrow the book A Warning by Anonymous will be released. You obviously abide by having anonymous sources, but is it a different standard to have somebody write an entire book in anonymity?
Yeah, it is, and it's absurd because he doesn't talk about specifics. He doesn't say when, where, how, who participated.
You've read the book?
Yes, I do. I haven't seen the book, and I just think it's a form of anti-journalism to just say and attacks and criticizes the president. I don't attack and criticize the president. I show people who work for him raising the questions about the president and his behavior.
Well,
that's much more significant than what judgment a reporter might make.
The same writer wrote the editorial that was, or the opinion piece that was published in the New York Times, essentially saying we want to let the American public know that we're, at that time, I think they've kind of reconfigured their argument, but somebody is in charge here, there's an adult in the room. What about considering it from that perspective? This person is obviously not a journalist. It's assumed that it's somebody who is fairly high-ranking within the administration that's trying to get word out to the American public.
Well, people are looking at this more and more and concluding that he may not be that high-ranking. What's a senior official, a GS-15? It's quite possible. So I'm not. I think there is a problem with the lack of specifics, and that's what journalism is about. It's kind of the assumption one. We're going to tell you what happened in as much detail as possible, what we call in reporting the best obtainable version of the truth. And that doesn't mean we're never going to find all the truth, and we shouldn't kid ourselves, but we can get pretty close. And so I think if the New York Times released that op-ed piece, I think a day or two after my book came out, and as if to kind of say, well, we had it too, or whatever, and if the person who wrote that had come to me and said, I'd like to publish this op-ed piece in the back of your book, I would have said, well, what are the specifics? What are you talking about? who, what, where, when, the basics of journalism. And if he didn't give them, I would have suggested he take it to the New York Times.
Right. As I mentioned, we are taking questions both from Facebook and our audience here at our studio at the Boston Public Library. Do you think people are, and I'm just reading these without really advance.
No, that's good. That's better.
So I'm just making sure I don't read anything inappropriate, is what I'm trying to say. Do you think people are...
Imagine something inappropriate being read or coming out.
It's a new world, you're right.
Yeah.
Do you think people are connecting the dots in all of the confusing elements in these hearings?
I think it's difficult, and I think it's confusing and hard to evaluate. At the same time, these are serious people. This is a serious inquiry. As my old partner Carl Bernstein said on the first day of the hearings, he said it's a good day for the truth, because I think it's very evident lots of people were telling the truth. At the same time, the president's supporters have a point. This is not firsthand, or a lot of it's not firsthand. Now, I think some of it is turning into very firsthand, and that makes a difference. But we're going to see. It's in the hands of really 47 Republicans in the Senate.
A lot of people, speaking of the hearings, were talking last week on Friday about Ambassador Yovanovitch and the president's tweet about her during the hearings. You've also been the subject of the president's tweets. Without having known you, I would argue you probably have a thicker skin. You've been in this field a lot longer in terms of being in the public realm. But what is it to be the target of the president?
Well, obviously upset her, and but you know, my view is you take any criticism seriously. Don't get unnerved by it. And I think the president has a point, though I think it's extremely distasteful and harmful to his own cause to do this. But he does have a First Amendment right to say what he wants. But it's what's the word? Mind-boggling.
Well, and you say that First Amendment, which he certainly does, but does it have a different weight because he is the president of the United States and he has so many followers?
Well, yes, it has more weight, and you know, that's a really tender ground to go in when somebody is testifying and attack them. When you're president of the United States, you know, he should tamp that down. I don't think anyone would look at that and say, gee, that's a great thing to do. I think it's a demonstration of the point I make, that it's a manifestation of a nervous breakdown, that no one's kind of saying, now wait a minute, let's take this tweet and count to 10 before we send it out, or better yet, count to 10,000.
Here's another question from an audience member here. How concerned are you with the validity of the 2020 election, given what we know about Russia and the integrity of votes or electoral votes?
Yeah, in the individual states, I think it's something people are alert to, and precautions are being taken, something to be very mindful of.
And finally, we just have about a minute or so left. I want to ask you about what Katharine Graham once told you, which I just read about today, actually. For some reason, I'd never come across it, but beware the demon pomposity.
Yeah.
This is when your career was exploding because of Watergate. What did she mean by that?
Well, this was after Nixon resigned, and she sent Carl Bernstein and myself a letter on yellow legal pad. She wrote, "Dear Carl and Bob, now that you did some of the stories about Nixon and he's gone, now don't start thinking too highly of yourselves. And let me give you some advice." And the advice is beware the demon pomposity. And I think it's wonderful advice for us in the media, for people in business and politics and Silicon Valley, and a lot of pomposity running around, and sometimes the pomposity of one person runs into the pomposity of another.
And you've always followed that advice?
I've kept it in my head, and it's a good lesson. And but you know, everyone gets full of themselves, and I'm, you know, who isn't guilty of that? I sure am. And what she was saying was, don't be full of yourselves. And this is the Graham Greene notion of the other side has a case, and you really need to understand it, and not just as a mechanical exercise to, oh yeah, let's look at the other side. You have to look at it as sincerely as you can.
Well, Bob Woodward, we should also mention you're here tonight and later this week as part of the Boston Speaker Series presented by Lesley University. We appreciate you taking your time to speak with us here at GBH News. Your latest book, of course, is Fear, to be continued. We understand from you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.